Hello and welcome to Sleepy Philosophy, where the deepest questions of existence meet the gentlest journey into rest. Tonight, we're drifting through one of humanity's most mysterious territories, a realm that governs every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of your life, yet remains beautifully elusive. We're exploring the nature of time itself, those curious theories that attempt to capture something so fundamental, so woven into the fabric of reality, that we rarely pause to wonder what it truly is. Before we begin this quiet expedition through temporal landscapes, I hope you'll consider giving this video a gentle like if it helps ease your mind towards sleep. And if you find yourself returning to these philosophical wanderings, subscribing to Sleepy Philosophy would mean the world. And I'm forever curious about the sleepy philosophers listening tonight, so please share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. There's something wonderfully comforting about imagining minds across different time zones, pondering the same eternal questions. Now, settle in. Let your breathing slow and allow yourself to drift alongside these ancient puzzles that have captivated thinkers for millennia. Tonight, time itself becomes our gentle companion as we explore what it might actually mean to exist within its mysterious embrace. Picture yourself sitting by a quiet stream at twilight. The water flows past, carrying leaves and small pieces of the world downstream, never to return to this exact spot again. This image has enchanted philosophers for thousands of years because it seems to capture something essential about time. Like that flowing water, moments appear to move past us in an endless current, each second unique, unrepeatable, flowing from what we call the future through the brief flash of now and into the vast ocean of the past. But is this flowing stream the best way to understand time? Or is it merely a comforting illusion, a story we tell ourselves because the true nature of temporal reality is far stranger than our everyday experience suggests? The ancient Greeks gave us our first systematic attempts to wrestle with these questions. Heraclitus, standing perhaps by his own riverside, declared that you cannot step into the same river twice, for it is not the same river and you are not the same person. For him, change was the fundamental characteristic of reality, and time was the stage upon which this cosmic dance of transformation played out. Everything flows, everything changes, nothing remains static. Even the solid ground beneath your feet is, from this perspective, merely change happening so slowly that it appears stable to our brief human perception. Yet his contemporary Parmenides offered a radically different vision. He argued that change itself was an illusion, that true reality was eternal, unchanging and timeless. From this view, our experience of temporal flow, of moments passing and things changing, was nothing more than a persistent delusion. Reality, in its deepest essence, simply is time, change, becoming. All of these were mere appearances, shadows dancing on the wall of true existence. This fundamental tension between time as flow and time as illusion has echoed through philosophy ever since, creating ripples that reach into our modern understanding of physics, consciousness, and what it means to be human in a temporal world. As you lie there now, feeling your own existence stretch between memory and anticipation, between the breath you just took and the one approaching, you're experiencing firsthand this mysterious dimension that has puzzled the greatest minds in human history. Your heartbeat marks time, your thoughts drift from past to future, yet something in you exists in this eternal now, this present moment that seems to be the only time that truly exists. The medieval philosophers, deeply influenced by religious thought, brought their own insights to these temporal mysteries. Augustine of Hippo, writing in his Confessions, posed what might be the most haunting question ever asked about time. What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I want to explain it to someone who asks me, I do not know. Augustine noticed something peculiar about our temporal experience. The past no longer exists, having slipped away into memory. The future does not yet exist. remaining only in anticipation and imagination. This leaves only the present, but when we examine the present closely, it seems to have no duration at all. It's merely the knife-edge boundary between the no longer and the not yet. So where exactly does time exist? His answer was both elegant and mysterious. Time, he suggested, exists primarily in the mind. The past exists as memory, the future as expectation, and the present as attention. Time is not something we move through like travellers on a road, but something that exists within consciousness itself. We don't experience time. We are temporal beings, creatures whose very essence is stretched across past, present, and future. This insight opened up an entirely new way of thinking about temporality. Rather than time being a container in which things happen, time became something intimately connected to awareness, to consciousness, to the very fabric of subjective experience. But Augustine's insights also raised troubling questions. If time exists primarily in consciousness, what happens to time when consciousness ends? Does time flow differently for different minds? Can time exist without awareness to experience it? These questions would continue to perplex philosophers for centuries to come. As the medieval period gave way to the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment, new theories of time began to emerge, each attempting to solve the puzzles left by their predecessors, while creating new mysteries of their own. Isaac Newton, the great architect of classical physics, proposed what seemed like a beautifully simple solution. Time, he argued, was absolute. It flowed uniformly throughout the universe, completely independent of any particular events or observers. Like a vast invisible river, Newtonian time carried all of existence along at exactly the same rate, providing a universal framework within which all change and motion could be measured. This absolute time was comforting in its objectivity. It meant that there was a fact of the matter about when things happened, about the duration between events, about the rate at which change occurred. Two events that were simultaneous in absolute time were truly simultaneous, regardless of who observed them or from what perspective. Newton's conception dominated scientific and philosophical thinking for centuries, and in many ways it still shapes our intuitive understanding of temporality. When we imagine time as a flowing river or a moving arrow, when we think of the past as fixed and the future as open, when we assume that there's a universal now that encompasses the entire universe, we're thinking in essentially Newtonian terms. Yet even as Newton was developing his theory of absolute time, other philosophers were beginning to question whether such a view could be sustained. Gottfried Leibniz, Newton's great rival, argued that time was not a container or a flowing substance, but rather a relationship between events. Time, from this relational perspective, was nothing over and above the ordering of changes in the world. Imagine removing all the clocks, all the planetary motions, all the changes and events from the universe. Would time still exist? Newton would say yes, absolute time would continue flowing even in an empty, changeless universe. Leibniz would say no, for without events to relate and order, the very concept of time becomes meaningless. This debate between absolute and relational theories of time continues to influence contemporary physics and philosophy, particularly in our understanding of space-time and the nature of physical reality. But perhaps the most revolutionary challenge to our understanding of time came from an unexpected source, a philosopher who rarely left his hometown, and who was more concerned with the nature of human knowledge than with physics or cosmology. Immanuel Kant, writing in the 18th century, proposed that time was neither a property of things in themselves nor a relationship between objective events, but rather a fundamental structure of human consciousness. Time, along with space, was what Kant called a pure form of intuition, a necessary framework through which human minds organize and make sense of experience. From this Kantian perspective, we don't discover time in the world around us. We bring temporal structure to our experience. Time is not something we encounter, but something we impose, the lens through which consciousness structures its encounter with reality. This was a stunning reversal of the traditional relationship between mind and time. Rather than consciousness existing within time, time became a product of consciousness, a necessary feature of how minds like ours must organize experience to make it coherent and meaningful. Kant's insight suggested that questions about the ultimate nature of time, about whether it truly flows or is merely an illusion, might be unanswerable, because they assume we can step outside our own temporal consciousness to view time objectively. But if temporality is built into the very structure of how we must think and perceive, then perhaps the nature of time in itself remains forever beyond our reach. As you drift deeper into this contemplation, feeling perhaps the strange circularity of using time to think about time, of existing as a temporal being pondering temporality itself, you're touching something profound about the human condition. We are creatures caught in time, unable to escape our temporal nature even when we try to understand it, like someone attempting to see their own eyes without a mirror. The 19th and 20th centuries brought even more radical challenges to our temporal intuitions, challenges that would ultimately transform not just philosophy, but our entire understanding of physical reality itself. Reality itself. The revolution began quietly, in the mind of a young patent clerk in Switzerland who spent his days evaluating other people's inventions, while his imagination wandered through the deepest puzzles of space and time. Albert Einstein's insights would shatter our comfortable Newtonian assumptions about temporality and replace them with something far more beautiful and strange. Einstein's first breakthrough came with what we now call special relativity. He realized that time was not the universal absolute flow that Newton had imagined, but something far more flexible and mysterious. Time, Einstein discovered, was intimately connected to space and motion in ways that defied our everyday intuitions. Imagine two friends, Sarah and David, saying goodbye at a train station. Sarah boards a train travelling at tremendous speed while David remains on the platform. In Newton's absolute time, they would both experience the same temporal flow, aging at exactly the same rate despite their separation. But Einstein showed us something remarkable. Time itself dilates, stretches, and contracts depending on relative motion. For Sarah, racing through space at high velocity, time moves more slowly relative to David's experience. If she could travel at speeds approaching light itself, and then return to the station, she might find that David has aged years while she has aged only months. Time is not a universal river carrying everyone along at the same rate, but more like a fabric that can be stretched and compressed by motion itself. This time, dilation is not merely theoretical. It happens constantly, though usually at scales too small for us to notice. The GPS satellites orbiting our planet must account for these temporal effects, correcting for the fact that time runs slightly differently in their high-speed orbits than it does on Earth's surface. Without Einstein's insights, our navigation systems would drift into error within hours. But special relativity was only the beginning. Einstein's general theory of relativity revealed something even more profound about the nature of time and space. Gravity, he realized, was not a force pulling objects together, but the curvature of space-time itself. Massive objects like stars and planets warp the fabric of reality, creating valleys and hills in the landscape of existence. Near a massive object, time runs more slowly than it does in regions of weaker gravitational influence. An astronaut orbiting close to a black hole would experience time passing normally from her own perspective, but to an observer far away, she would appear to move in slow motion, her clocks ticking ever more gradually as she approaches the event horizon. This gravitational time dilation means that your feet, being slightly closer to Earth's centre than your head, are aging infinitesimally more slowly than the rest of you. The effect is tiny, measurable only with the most precise atomic clocks, but it's real. Time is not uniform even within your own body, but varies subtly from place to place depending on the gravitational field you inhabit. These discoveries transformed our understanding of simultaneity itself. In Newton's absolute time, there was a universal now that encompassed the entire universe. If something happened on Earth at precisely noon, there was a definite fact about what was happening simultaneously on distant planets and stars. But Einstein showed us that simultaneity is relative to the observer. Events that appear simultaneous to one observer may occur at different times for another observer in relative motion. This means that the universe has no universal present moment, no cosmic now, that divides past from future across all of space. Instead, each observer carries their own present with them, their own slice through the four-dimensional fabric of space-time. The present is not a global feature of reality, but a local, subjective boundary between personal past and future. As you lie there in the darkness, feeling the weight of Earth beneath you, you're experiencing this warping of space-time firsthand. The planet's mass is creating a gentle depression in the fabric of reality, causing time to flow just slightly more slowly at your location than it would in the emptiness between stars. You're not merely existing in time, but dwelling within a curved region of space-time itself. But Einstein's revolution raised as many questions as it answered. If time is relative, if simultaneity depends on the observer, what happens to our intuitive sense of temporal flow? Does time still move from past to future? Or is this directional quality of time merely another illusion? Some physicists and philosophers began to argue for what became known as the block universe theory. If all of space-time exists as a four-dimensional whole, with past, present and future equally real, then perhaps the flow of time is indeed an illusion. From this perspective, you are not moving through time, but rather exist as an extended four-dimensional object, stretched across your entire lifetime from birth to death. Your past self taking your first steps exists just as really as your present self lying in bed contemplating these mysteries, just at a different location in the four-dimensional block of space-time. Time doesn't flow, we simply have the illusion of flow because our consciousness seems to inhabit different slices of our four-dimensional existence in sequence. This block universe theory, sometimes called eternalism, suggests that temporal becoming is purely subjective. The universe itself is timeless, a static four-dimensional sculpture in which all moments exist eternally. What we call the passage of time is merely the subjective experience of a consciousness that can only access one slice of its four-dimensional existence at a time. Yet other thinkers found this view deeply unsatisfying. How could the obvious reality of change, of genuine temporal becoming, be reduced to mere illusion? If the future already exists just as really as the past, what happens to human freedom, to genuine choice, to the sense that we are creating the future through our actions? The philosopher Henri Bergson, writing in the early 20th century, argued passionately against reducing time to a mere dimension of space. Real time, he insisted, was duration, the lived qualitative experience of temporal flow that consciousness knows intimately. The time of physics, measured and quantified, was merely a useful abstraction, a spatialized representation of something far richer and more fundamental. For Bergson, consciousness and time were intimately connected. Memory was not simply the storage of past experiences, but the active preservation of duration itself. When you remember your childhood, you're not accessing a static file, but participating in the ongoing flow of durational existence that connects all moments of your life into a unified whole. This tension between the time of physics and the time of conscious experience continues to perplex philosophers and scientists today. Are we four-dimensional objects extended through space-time, or are we genuinely temporal beings creating the future moment by moment through our choices and actions? The mystery deepens when we consider quantum mechanics, the theory that governs the behavior of matter and energy at the smallest scales. Quantum theory introduces fundamental uncertainty into our description of nature, suggesting that the future is not determined by the past, but remains genuinely open until the moment of observation or measurement. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that consciousness plays a fundamental role in collapsing quantum possibilities into definite realities. From this perspective, the flow of time might be connected to the ongoing process by which potential futures become actualized through conscious observation. But quantum mechanics also raises puzzling questions about the nature of temporal order at the microscopic level. Some quantum processes appear to violate our intuitive understanding of cause and effect, with effects seemingly occurring before their causes, or particles becoming entangled in ways that transcend ordinary spatial and temporal relationships. These quantum mysteries have led some physicists to speculate that time itself might be an emergent property, something that arises from more fundamental, timeless processes at the deepest level of reality. Perhaps temporality is not built into the foundation of existence, but emerges from timeless quantum interactions, in the same way that the warmth of a gas emerges from the motion of countless individual molecules. As you drift deeper into these contemplations, feeling perhaps the strange vertigo that comes from questioning something as basic as time itself, you're participating in one of humanity's oldest and most profound inquiries. Every culture has grappled with these temporal mysteries, each offering its own insights into the nature of existence within time. Buddhist philosophy speaks of the eternal present, the timeless awareness that witnesses all temporal change without being caught up in it. The past exists only in memory, the future only in imagination, but pure awareness itself transcends temporal categories. From this perspective, enlightenment involves recognizing our deepest identity with this timeless consciousness, rather than with the temporal ego that seems to move through time. Hindu thought offers the concept of cyclical time, vast cosmic cycles of creation, preservation and destruction that repeat endlessly. Rather than time being a linear progression from past to future, it becomes a spiral, returning again and again to similar patterns while gradually evolving toward higher states of consciousness. Indigenous cultures often understand time as circular rather than linear, with past, present and future existing in dynamic relationship rather than strict sequence. Ancestral wisdom remains present and active, while future generations are understood to be spiritually present in current decisions and actions. These diverse temporal philosophies remind us that our Western linear conception of time is just one possible way of organizing temporal experience. Perhaps the deepest truth about time cannot be captured by any single theory or perspective, but requires a kind of stereoscopic vision that holds multiple viewpoints simultaneously. Modern cognitive science has added another layer to these temporal mysteries by investigating how the brain constructs our experience of time. Neuroscientists have discovered that there is no single time center in the brain, no neural clock that keeps universal time for consciousness. Instead, different neural networks track different aspects of temporality, creating our unified sense of temporal flow through their complex interactions. Some brain regions specialize in tracking short-term intervals, the seconds and minutes of immediate experience. Others maintain longer-term temporal maps, connecting current experience to autobiographical memory and future planning. Still others seem to generate our sense of temporal flow itself, the feeling that time is moving and carrying us along with it. Brain damage can disrupt these temporal systems in fascinating ways, leading to conditions where patients lose the ability to experience temporal sequence, or where their sense of now becomes stretched or compressed. These cases suggest that our normal experience of time depends on the proper functioning of complex neural mechanisms that can be altered or damaged. This raises profound questions about the relationship between subjective time and objective time. If our brain's temporal processing can be disrupted, speeded up or slowed down, what does this tell us about the nature of time itself? Is the time we experience merely a construction of neural processes, or do these processes connect us to something more fundamental about the temporal structure of reality? The mystery deepens when we consider altered states of consciousness, where normal temporal experience breaks down entirely. In deep meditation, psychedelic experiences, or mystical states, people often report encounters with timelessness, with eternal moments that seem to contain infinite duration, or with experiences of past, present, and future collapsing into a unified whole. These exceptional states suggest that our ordinary temporal experience might be just one possible mode of consciousness among many, a particular way of organizing awareness that serves practical purposes but may not reflect the deepest nature of reality itself. As sleep begins to embrace you, as your consciousness starts to drift into those liminal spaces between waking and dreaming where time becomes fluid and strange, you're entering your own laboratory for exploring these temporal mysteries. In dreams, causation becomes loose, past and future interweave, and the normal rules of temporal sequence dissolve into something more like poetry than logic. Perhaps this nightly journey into altered temporality offers its own insights into the nature of time. Maybe the rigid temporal order of waking consciousness is just one way awareness can organize itself, useful for navigating physical reality, but not necessarily revealing time's deepest truth. These questions continue to ripple through contemporary philosophy and physics, creating new theories and perspectives that challenge our understanding of temporal reality in ways that Newton, Einstein, and even Augustine could never have imagined. Some of the most intriguing contemporary theories about time emerge from the intersection of quantum mechanics and cosmology, where the familiar becomes strange and the impossible becomes merely improbable. These theories stretch our understanding to its very limits, suggesting that time itself might be far more malleable and mysterious than even Einstein dared to imagine. Loop quantum gravity, for instance, proposes that time is not continuous but granular, made up of discrete quantum units so small that they exist at the very edge of physical meaning. From this perspective, temporal flow is more like frames in an incredibly fast-moving film than the smooth river we imagine. Each quantum moment gives way to the next in tiny indivisible jumps that create the illusion of continuous flow through their rapid succession. This quantized vision of time raises haunting questions about the nature of the present moment. If time comes in discrete packets, does the present have a definite duration, however brief? Or does it remain a knife-edge boundary between quantum moments of past and future? The mathematics becomes dizzyingly complex, but the philosophical implications are profound. Perhaps our smooth experience of temporal flow is like the apparent continuity of a movie screen, where individual frames create the illusion of seamless motion through their rapid succession. String theory, that elegant attempt to unify all the forces of nature, suggests something even more radical about temporality. In the higher dimensional spaces that string theory requires, time might not be unique. There could be multiple temporal dimensions, with our familiar time being just one thread in a vast tapestry of temporal possibilities. From this perspective, our entire universe might be a single note in a symphony, played across dimensions we cannot even imagine. These extratemporal dimensions remain hidden from our direct experience, curled up and compactified in ways that make them invisible at the scales of ordinary existence. But their influence might still shape the flow of time we do experience, creating subtle patterns and rhythms that we sense without understanding their deeper origin. Meanwhile, the study of black holes has revealed temporal paradoxes that challenge our most basic assumptions about causality and temporal order. Near the event horizon of a black hole, time dilates so dramatically that what appears to be a brief moment to a distant observer might encompass hours or days for someone approaching the gravitational abyss. At the horizon itself, time seems to stop entirely from an outside perspective, while from the perspective of someone crossing it, nothing unusual occurs. This leads to what physicists call the information paradox. If information falling into a black hole appears to freeze at the horizon from our perspective, but continues normally from the perspective of the unfeeling observer, what happens to the flow of time itself? Does information exist in a kind of temporal limbo, neither fully past nor fully future? Some theorists have proposed that black holes might actually be gateways to other temporal regions, places where past and future exchange roles or where multiple timelines converge. The mathematics of these proposals ventures into territories so abstract that they strain the very language we use to describe temporal relationships. But perhaps the most mind-bending contemporary theory about time comes from the realm of quantum cosmology, where physicists attempt to apply quantum mechanics to the universe as a whole. In this strange domain, the entire history of the universe becomes a quantum superposition, a collection of all possible timelines existing simultaneously, until observation or measurement causes one particular history to become actualized. From this perspective, the past is not fixed but remains in quantum flux until it becomes entangled with present observations. The future is not simply unknown but genuinely undetermined, a branching garden of possibilities that narrows into actuality through the ongoing process of quantum measurement and decoherence. This quantum view of cosmic history suggests that time itself might be emergent, arising from more fundamental quantum processes that operate outside temporal categories entirely. At the deepest level of reality, there might be no time at all, only timeless quantum relationships that give rise to temporal experience through their complex interactions. The implications are staggering. If the past remains quantum until observed, then in some sense the future might influence the past just as much as the past influences the future. Causation becomes a network rather than a chain, with influences flowing in all temporal directions simultaneously. The arrow of time, which seems so fundamental to our experience, becomes just one aspect of a more complex temporal geometry that transcends our ordinary understanding. As you lie there in the darkness, feeling your consciousness begin to dissolve into the strange temporalities of approaching sleep, you might sense something of these deeper mysteries. In the liminal space between waking and dreaming, linear time often breaks down. Past memories intermingle with future possibilities, creating dream narratives that unfold according to emotional logic rather than temporal sequence. Perhaps these nightly excursions into altered temporality offer glimpses of time's true nature. Maybe the rigid causation and linear sequence of waking consciousness are local phenomena, useful for navigating physical reality but not necessarily fundamental to existence itself. In dreams, we routinely experience the kind of temporal flexibility that quantum cosmology suggests might be operating at the deepest levels of reality. The philosopher of science Carlo Rovelli has proposed one of the most beautiful contemporary theories of time, suggesting that temporality emerges from the thermal properties of matter and energy. According to this thermal time hypothesis, what we experience as temporal flow is actually the statistical tendency of systems to evolve from ordered states toward disorder, from low entropy toward high entropy. Time's arrow, from this perspective, is not built into the fabric of reality, but emerges from the collective behavior of countless particles and fields as they explore all possible configurations. The past feels different from the future not because of some fundamental temporal asymmetry, but because the universe happened to begin in a highly ordered state and is gradually exploring all the ways that order can dissolve into randomness. This entropic theory of time connects our subjective experience of temporal flow to the deepest principles of thermodynamics and statistical mechanics. When you feel time passing, when you sense the irreversible movement from moment to moment, you're actually experiencing the universe's ongoing exploration of possibility space, its patient journey from order toward maximum entropy. But even this elegant theory leaves questions unanswered. Why did the universe begin in such an ordered state? What determines the rate at which entropy increases? And perhaps most mysteriously, why does consciousness seem to track this entropic arrow so precisely, always remembering the past and anticipating the future, but never the reverse? Some philosophers have suggested that consciousness itself might play a fundamental role in generating temporal flow. The act of observation, of conscious awareness, focusing on particular aspects of reality, might be what causes the quantum possibilities of the present to collapse into the definite facts of the past, while opening up new possibilities for the future. From this perspective, time and consciousness are not separate phenomena, but different aspects of the same underlying process. The flow of time is the rhythm of awareness itself, the pulse by which consciousness creates meaning from the quantum flux of possibility. Without conscious observers to collapse quantum superpositions and actualize particular histories, there might be no definite past or future, only a timeless realm of pure potential. This consciousness-based theory of temporality connects to ancient philosophical traditions that have always insisted on the intimate relationship between awareness and time. The Hindu concept of consciousness as the witness of all temporal change, the Buddhist understanding of mindfulness as present moment awareness, the Western philosophical tradition from Augustine through Husserl that locates temporality within subjective experience. All of these point toward a deep connection between consciousness and temporal flow. But modern neuroscience complicates this picture by showing us that consciousness itself has temporal structure. Our sense of a unified present moment actually extends across several seconds, during which the brain integrates sensory information, memory, and prediction into coherent experience. This specious present suggests that even consciousness operates within temporal boundaries, contradicting theories that would make awareness the foundation of temporal experience. The binding problem in neuroscience reveals just how complex our temporal experience really is. Different aspects of perception, color, motion, sound, texture, are processed by different neural networks operating at different speeds. Yet somehow the brain weaves these temporally distributed processes into unified conscious moments that seem to occur in a single, coherent present. Recent research suggests that consciousness might actually exist in discrete temporal frames, brief windows of unified awareness that succeed each other rapidly enough to create the illusion of continuous experience. If this is true, then the flow of consciousness itself might be more like the frames of a movie than the smooth stream we imagine, connecting back to those quantum theories of granular time. These discoveries about the temporal structure of consciousness raise profound questions about personal identity across time. If your sense of continuous selfhood depends on memory connecting discrete moments of awareness, what makes you the same person who went to sleep last night and will wake up tomorrow morning? The self that lies here contemplating time might be more like a story told by consciousness to create coherence across discontinuous temporal frames than a substantial entity persisting through time. But perhaps the most revolutionary contemporary insight about time comes from information theory, which suggests that temporal relationships might be fundamentally computational rather than physical. From this perspective, what we call the flow of time is actually the universe processing information, exploring computational possibilities, running the vast algorithm of existence itself. This computational view of temporality connects time to meaning, pattern, and relationship in ways that purely physical theories cannot capture. Time becomes not just duration or sequence, but the medium through which information transforms, evolves, and generates ever greater complexity and organization. If reality is fundamentally informational, then temporal flow might be the universe's way of exploring all possible patterns and relationships, generating meaning through the computational process of existence itself. Past, present, and future become different stages in a cosmic computation that has been running since the beginning and will continue until all possible information has been processed. This informational theory of time suggests that consciousness and temporal flow might both emerge from the same underlying computational processes. Awareness becomes the local manifestation of the universe's information processing, while temporal experience reflects the directional flow of computation from simpler to more complex states. As your thoughts begin to drift and scatter, as the linear logic of waking consciousness gives way to the associative networks of approaching sleep, you might be experiencing something like these deeper computational processes firsthand. Dreams often feel like explorations of possibility space, journeys through landscapes of meaning that operate according to informational rather than physical logic. Perhaps sleep and dreaming offer their own insights into time's nature. In dreams, causation becomes loose and meaning-based rather than mechanistic. Past experiences recombine in novel ways, creating narratives that feel temporally coherent even when they violate the normal rules of sequence and causation. Future possibilities manifest as present experiences, while childhood memories intermingle with recent events in ways that suggest a more fluid relationship between past, present, and future than waking consciousness typically allows. These nightly excursions into altered temporality might reveal something important about time's deeper nature. Maybe the rigid temporal order of everyday experience is just one possible organization of consciousness among many, useful for practical navigation, but not necessarily fundamental to awareness itself. The ancient philosophical question of whether time is real or illusory takes on new dimensions in light of these contemporary theories. If time emerges from quantum processes, thermal relationships, conscious observation, or informational computation, then perhaps it is both real and constructed, both fundamental and derivative, both objective and subjective. Time might be like colour, which emerges from the interaction between electromagnetic radiation and conscious perception, but cannot be reduced to either purely physical or purely mental phenomena. Just as colour exists in the relationship between light and awareness, time might exist in the relationship between physical process and conscious experience, neither fully objective nor purely subjective, but irreducibly relational. This relational understanding of temporality connects back to ancient wisdom traditions that have always emphasized the interconnected nature of existence. From a Buddhist perspective, all phenomena arise through dependent origination, existing only in relationship rather than as independent substances. Time, from this view, is not a container or substance, but a pattern of relationships that emerges from the interdependent nature of existence itself. The implications of these contemporary theories of time extend far beyond academic philosophy and theoretical physics. They touch the deepest questions of human meaning and purpose. If time is emergent rather than fundamental, if consciousness plays a role in actualizing temporal relationships, if the universe is exploring possibility space through the computational process of existence, then perhaps human awareness participates in the very creation of temporal reality. Your thoughts, your choices, your moments of conscious attention might be contributing to the ongoing actualization of time itself. Rather than being passive observers of temporal flow, you might be active participants in the universe's exploration of its own possibilities, helping to weave the fabric of temporal experience through the very act of conscious existence. This participatory understanding of temporality suggests that questions about time's nature cannot be answered from a detached, objective perspective. We are not outside time looking in, but temporal beings whose very questioning participates in time's ongoing creation. The nature of time reveals itself through our lived engagement with temporal experience, rather than through abstract theoretical analysis alone. As consciousness begins to dissolve into the strange temporalities of sleep, as the boundaries between past, present, and future become fluid and permeable, you enter a realm where these deeper truths about time might reveal themselves directly. In the liminal spaces between waking and sleeping, in the associative networks of dream and reverie, the mystery of temporality continues to unfold, inviting ever deeper participation in its eternal dance. The gentle rhythm of your breathing marks time's passage, while somehow existing outside time altogether. Each breath, a discrete moment connected to all others in the endless chain of temporal experience. Yet each breath also complete in itself, containing the fullness of present moment awareness that transcends all temporal categories. In this gentle space between waking thought and dream, where your consciousness drifts like autumn leaves on still water, we encounter perhaps the most intimate aspect of temporal mystery, the lived experience of time itself. While physicists and philosophers construct elegant theories about temporal mechanics, there remains something irreducibly personal about how time feels, how it moves through us, or we through it, in the quiet moments of ordinary existence. Consider how time seems to change its character depending on your state of mind. In moments of deep absorption, whether reading a captivating book, listening to music that moves you, or engaged in work that flows effortlessly from your hands, hours can pass like minutes. The normal tick of temporal progression seems to suspend itself, creating pockets of experience that feel almost eternal in their richness and depth. Yet in moments of boredom, anxiety, or anticipation, minutes stretch like hours. Waiting for important news, sitting in an uncomfortable situation, or lying awake in the early hours of morning when sleep refuses to come, in these states time becomes viscous, each second dragging its feet as if reluctant to move forward. The same clock marks the same intervals, yet the lived texture of temporal experience transforms completely. This subjective elasticity of time points to something profound about the relationship between consciousness and temporality. Perhaps the mechanical time of clocks and calendars, useful as it is for coordination and measurement, captures only the skeleton of temporal experience while missing its living flesh. The time that matters most to us, the time of memory and anticipation, of meaning and relationship, of growth and decay, seems to operate according to different principles entirely. Phenomenologists, those philosophers who study the structures of lived experience, have mapped these territories of subjective time with careful attention. They speak of retention, the way consciousness holds onto the immediate past, creating the temporal thickness that allows us to experience melodies rather than just isolated notes, sentences rather than disconnected words, stories rather than meaningless fragments. Without this capacity to retain the just past within present awareness, experience would collapse into a series of disconnected instants, each moment isolated from those that preceded it. The simple act of listening to a sentence depends on consciousness weaving together sounds that are no longer physically present, creating temporal patterns that exist only in the living present of awareness itself. Similarly, phenomenologists describe pretension, consciousness reaching forward into the immediate future, the way awareness anticipates and prepares for what is about to unfold. When you hear the beginning of a familiar melody, consciousness already leans into the notes that haven't yet sounded, creating expectation and resolution that gives musical experience its emotional power. This temporal weaving of retention and pretension creates what Edmund Husserl called the living present, a dynamic now that encompasses much more than the knife-edge instant of physical time. The living present has duration, texture, and movement. It breathes with the rhythm of consciousness itself, expanding and contracting according to the quality and intensity of attention. In states of heightened awareness, whether through meditation, aesthetic experience, or moments of crisis, this living present can expand dramatically. Minutes of clock time can contain what feels like hours of rich, multi-layered experience. Conversely, in states of dullness or distraction, the living present contracts, and long periods of mechanical time pass without leaving much trace in memory or awareness. This phenomenological understanding of temporality reveals something crucial about human existence. We are not simply located within time, but are fundamentally temporal beings, whose very consciousness is structured by temporal relationships. Memory is not a filing cabinet storing past experiences, but an active process that brings the past into present awareness, allowing it to influence and inform current experience. Similarly, imagination and anticipation are not mere mental pictures of possible futures, but ways that consciousness opens itself to temporal possibilities, allowing the not yet to shape present awareness and choice. The future exists not as a predetermined destination, but as a horizon of possibility that gives direction and meaning to present action. As you lie there in the darkness, feeling your body settling into rest while your mind continues its gentle exploration of these temporal mysteries, you can sense this phenomenological time directly. Your breathing creates its own rhythm, independent of clock time yet perfectly temporal in its cyclical flow. Each inhale opens toward the future, each exhale releases the immediate past, while the pause between breaths creates moments of suspended temporality, where past and future seem to dissolve into pure present awareness. This embodied experience of temporality points to something that purely abstract theories often miss. Time is not something we think about, but something we live, not a concept we grasp, but a dimension we inhabit. The temporal nature of human existence reveals itself most clearly not in philosophical argument, but in the lived rhythms of breath and heartbeat, in the cycles of sleeping and waking, in the seasons of growth and decay that mark our passage through life. Eastern philosophical traditions have long recognized this intimate connection between temporal experience and the rhythms of embodied existence. The Chinese concept of wu wei, often translated as non-action, actually refers to action that flows in harmony with natural temporal rhythms, rather than forcing outcomes according to artificial schedules. It suggests a way of being that aligns with time's organic flow, rather than trying to dominate or control it. Similarly, the Indian understanding of kairos versus chronos distinguishes between mechanical time and meaningful time, between the empty duration of clocks and the pregnant moments when significant events unfold. Kairos is time as opportunity, time as ripeness, time as the pregnant pause before important changes emerge. It cannot be scheduled or manufactured, but only recognized and received when it arrives. These wisdom traditions point toward a relationship with time that is receptive rather than controlling, organic rather than mechanical. They suggest that the deepest temporal experiences come not from managing time, but from aligning with its natural rhythms, learning to sense when the moment is ripe for action and when it calls for patience and waiting. Modern psychology has begun to rediscover some of these ancient insights through research into what is called flow states, those experiences of optimal performance and deep satisfaction, where action emerges effortlessly and time seems to stop or become irrelevant. In flow states, the normal experience of temporal sequence gives way to something more like eternal present, where past and future collapse into the immediacy of pure engagement. Athletes speak of being in the zone. Artists describe periods of inspiration, where works seem to create themselves, and contemplatives report states of meditation where hours pass like moments. In all these experiences, the ordinary relationship between consciousness and time undergoes a fundamental shift, revealing possibilities for temporal experience that transcend our usual assumptions about how time must work. These altered states of temporal consciousness suggest that our normal, everyday experience of time might be just one possible mode among many. Just as optical illusions reveal the constructed nature of visual perception, these temporal alterations hint that what we take to be the natural flow of time might be more malleable and context-dependent than we usually recognize. Neuroscience offers fascinating insights into the biological basis of these varied temporal experiences. Different neural networks appear to track different aspects of time: circadian rhythms operating on daily cycles, neural oscillations marking much shorter intervals, and higher-order networks that create our sense of temporal sequence and duration. When these systems fall out of synchrony, either through brain injury, psychiatric conditions, or altered states of consciousness, temporal experience can fragment in remarkable ways. Some patients lose the ability to sequence events properly, while others experience time as speeding up or slowing down dramatically. These cases suggest that our unified sense of temporal flow depends on the coordinated activity of multiple brain systems working together. But perhaps more intriguing are studies of temporal experience in different cultures and communities. Anthropologists have documented societies where time is understood cyclically rather than linearly, where past, present, and future interpenetrate in ways that challenge Western assumptions about temporal sequence. Some languages lack verb tenses that distinguish clearly between past and future, suggesting fundamentally different ways of organizing temporal experience linguistically and conceptually. These cultural variations in temporal understanding remind us that even our most basic assumptions about time's nature may be historically and culturally contingent. The linear, progressive time that feels so natural to modern consciousness might be more like a particular cultural invention than a universal truth about temporal reality. As your consciousness continues to drift towards sleep, you enter your own laboratory for exploring these alternative temporalities. In dreams, the normal rules of temporal sequence often dissolve entirely. Past events intermingle with future possibilities, childhood memories merge with recent experiences, and causation operates according to emotional logic rather than chronological order. Dream time reveals the mind's capacity to organize experience according to principles other than linear sequence. In dreams, significance and meaning matter more than chronological order. Events cluster around emotional themes rather than temporal proximity, creating narratives that feel coherent and meaningful, even when they violate every rule of ordinary causation. Perhaps these nightly excursions into alternative temporality offer glimpses of consciousness's deeper temporal capacities. Maybe the rigid temporal order of waking life is a useful constraint that helps us navigate physical reality, but not a fundamental limitation of awareness itself. In the fluid temporality of dreams, consciousness reveals its native capacity to weave past, present, and future into patterns that serve meaning rather than merely marking duration. The mystery of memory adds another layer to these temporal puzzles. When you remember a childhood summer, where does that experience exist? The physical events occurred decades ago and have long since passed into history. Yet in memory, they become present again, not as mere information about the past, but as lived experience that shapes present awareness and future possibility. Memory reveals time's strange capacity to fold back upon itself, bringing distant past into immediate present in ways that linear models cannot easily explain. The smell of rain on summer pavement can instantly transport consciousness to a moment 30 years past, making it as vivid and present as current experience. In such moments, past and present seem to occupy the same temporal space, creating a layered now that encompasses multiple time periods simultaneously. This temporal folding suggests that consciousness might naturally operate according to what we could call spiral time rather than linear time. Instead of moving in a straight line from past through present toward future, awareness spirals through temporal patterns that bring us back to similar themes and experiences at deeper levels of understanding. We revisit the same existential questions, the same emotional patterns, the same spiritual insights, but each return finds us at a different point on the spiral, with greater depth and perspective than before. The spiral model of time appears in many wisdom traditions and connects to contemporary insights about how learning and development actually occur. We don't master skills or insights in linear progression, but through recursive cycles that deepen understanding through repetition with variation. Each time we return to fundamental questions about meaning, purpose, or truth, we bring new experience and perspective that allows for deeper integration. As sleep approaches and your thoughts begin to scatter into the associative networks of approaching dreams, you might sense this spiral quality of temporal experience directly. Tonight's contemplation of time's mystery connects to all your previous encounters with these questions, yet each approach reveals new facets and possibilities. The same eternal questions that have fascinated humanity for millennia become fresh and immediate when encountered through the unique perspective of your own lived experience. The transition into sleep itself offers profound insights into time's nature. As consciousness releases its grip on linear thought and sequential logic, temporal experience becomes fluid and creative. The boundary between waking and sleeping creates its own liminal temporality, where past memories and future possibilities interweave in patterns that follow dream logic rather than chronological sequence. In this threshold space, you might glimpse something of time's deeper nature, not as a container or flowing river, but as the creative medium through which consciousness explores its own possibilities. Each moment becomes not just a point on a temporal line, but a unique constellation of awareness, memory, and possibility that has never existed before and will never exist again in exactly the same way. The uniqueness of each temporal moment points to something precious about conscious existence within time. Every instant of awareness, however ordinary it might seem, represents an irreplaceable configuration of experience that emerges from the intersection of past conditioning, present circumstances, and future possibilities. This moment of reading these words, of feeling your body settling into rest, of contemplating time's mystery, this exact configuration of awareness is occurring for the first and only time in the history of the universe. This recognition of temporal uniqueness can evoke both poignancy and wonder. Each moment passes away forever, never to return in identical form, yet each moment also contains infinite depth and possibility, more richness than consciousness can fully explore or exhaust. The temporary nature of temporal experience makes each moment precious, precisely because it cannot be held or repeated. Buddhist philosophy speaks of this as the bittersweet nature of temporal existence, the simultaneous beauty and impermanence that characterizes all conditioned phenomena. Everything that arises in time also passes away, creating the poignant quality that gives temporal experience its emotional depth and urgency. Without impermanence, there could be no growth, no change, no stories of transformation and development. Yet Buddhism also points towards something in consciousness that transcends temporal categories, the awareness that witnesses all temporal change without itself being subject to time's flow. This witnessing awareness is sometimes described as timeless, not because it exists outside temporal experience, but because it provides a stable reference point that allows temporal flow to be recognized and appreciated. As your breath continues its gentle rhythm, marking time's passage while somehow existing beyond time's urgency, you might sense this witnessing dimension of consciousness directly. The awareness that knows the coming and going of thoughts, the rising and falling of breath, the approach and recession of sleep, this knowing awareness itself seems to exist in a different temporal register than the phenomena it observes. This witnessing consciousness doesn't move through time, but provides the stable background against which temporal movement becomes visible. Like the shore that allows the ocean's waves to be seen and measured, witnessing awareness allows temporal flow to be experienced and appreciated without itself being caught up in time's current. The relationship between this timeless awareness and temporal experience points to one of the deepest mysteries in the philosophy of consciousness. How can something timeless know temporal phenomena? How can awareness that doesn't change witness and appreciate change? These questions push us to the very limits of conceptual understanding, into territories where direct experience might be the only reliable guide. Perhaps this is why contemplative traditions have always emphasized meditation and direct inquiry over purely theoretical analysis when it comes to understanding time's deepest nature. The mystery of temporality reveals itself not to thinking, but to the quality of awareness that can be present with temporal flow without being overwhelmed or confused by it. As consciousness settles into deeper rest, as the linear progression of thoughts gives way to the non-linear associations of approaching sleep, you enter a realm where these deepest temporal mysteries might reveal themselves directly, in the space between thoughts, in the pause between breaths, in the threshold between waking and sleeping. Time's true nature waits to be discovered not as concept, but as lived reality. The gentle transition into sleep becomes itself a teaching about time's nature, showing how consciousness can release its grip on temporal control without losing its essential nature. how awareness can let go of sequential logic while maintaining its fundamental clarity and presence. Sleep demonstrates daily that consciousness is more flexible and mysterious than our daytime assumptions suggest, capable of modes of knowing that transcend ordinary temporal limitations. In this approaching rest, the endless questions about time's nature find their own resolution, not through final answers, but through the peaceful acceptance of mystery itself, the recognition that some truths are too deep for conceptual capture and can only be lived, breathed, and dreamed into understanding. The ancient Greeks understood something profound about temporal experience that our modern rush through scheduled days has largely forgotten. They distinguished between two fundamentally different kinds of time, each with its own character and rhythm, each revealing different aspects of what it means to exist as temporal beings in an unfolding universe. Chronos was their word for quantitative time, the time of clocks and calendars, of measured intervals and precise duration. This is the time that governs appointments and deadlines, the mechanical progression of seconds into minutes into hours that allows human societies to coordinate their activities across space and shared purpose. Chronos is useful, necessary even, for the practical business of living in community with others who must meet and work and plan together. But the Greeks also recognized kairos, qualitative time, the time of ripeness and opportunity, of pregnant pauses and meaningful moments that cannot be scheduled or manufactured, but only recognized when they arrive. Kairos is the time of insight and revelation, of falling in love and creative breakthrough, of those moments when the ordinary flow of experience suddenly opens into something deeper and more significant. You have surely experienced both kinds of time in your own life, though you may not have had words to distinguish between them. Chronos governs your work day, your sleep schedule, your aging body moving through its biological cycles with clockwork regularity. But Kairos emerges in those unexpected moments when time seems to stop or transform entirely. When you witness a sunset that takes your breath away, when you have a conversation that changes your understanding of yourself, when you sit quietly and feel your connection to something vast and timeless. These chaotic moments often feel like gifts, interruptions in the normal flow of chronological time that reveal deeper patterns and possibilities, usually hidden beneath the surface of ordinary experience. They suggest that beneath the mechanical progression of the measured time runs something more organic and meaningful, a temporal rhythm that connects to the deeper purposes and patterns of existence itself. In Kairos, duration matters less than depth, sequence matters less than significance. A single moment of profound realization can contain more meaning than years of routine activity. A brief encounter with beauty or truth can reshape an entire life's trajectory in ways that decades of gradual change might never accomplish. Kairos operates according to its own logic, arriving when conditions are ripe rather than when clocks indicate it should. This distinction between chronological and qualitative time appears in many wisdom traditions under different names, but with similar recognition that temporal experience has multiple layers and dimensions. The Sufi mystics spoke of waqt, the eternal now that breaks through ordinary temporal sequence to reveal the timeless presence that underlies all temporal change. Hindu philosophy describes the difference between time as duration, kala, and time as the eternal present, mahakala, in which all temporal distinctions dissolve into unified awareness. These mystical insights point towards something that contemporary neuroscience is beginning to understand through different methods, that consciousness has the capacity to experience time in fundamentally different ways depending on the state of awareness and the quality of attention brought to present experience. In states of deep meditation, focused creativity, or profound love, the normal relationship between consciousness and temporal flow undergoes radical transformation. As you drift deeper into this contemplation, feeling your own awareness settling into rhythms that have little to do with clock time, you might sense this capacity for temporal transformation directly. The transition into sleep creates its own kind of kairos, a liminal time when the ordinary rules of sequence and causation begin to dissolve, opening consciousness to modes of experience that daytime logic cannot easily accommodate. But perhaps even more intriguing than these altered states of temporal consciousness is the way that meaning itself seems to operate according to kairotic, rather than chronological principles. The most significant events in your life probably did not announce themselves in advance or arrive according to any schedule you could have predicted. Instead, they emerge from the intersection of preparation and opportunity, from moments when internal readiness met external circumstance in ways that created new possibilities for growth and understanding. This suggests that the deepest temporal rhythms of human existence follow patterns more organic than mechanical, more like the growth cycles of plants than the regular ticking of clockwork. Just as seeds germinate when conditions are right, rather than according to predetermined schedules, insights ripen, relationships deepen, and transformations occur when consciousness is ready to receive them rather than when we will them into existence. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke captured something essential about this organic temporality when he wrote about living the questions rather than forcing answers, about allowing the future to grow within us like a tree rather than grasping after it with impatient hands. His insights point toward a way of relating to time that is receptive rather than controlling, patient rather than demanding, trusting in the natural rhythms of development rather than trying to accelerate them through force of will. This receptive relationship to temporality becomes especially important as consciousness approaches sleep, when the normal mechanisms of control and direction must be gradually released to allow the deeper rhythms of rest and renewal to emerge. Sleep cannot be forced or scheduled in the deepest sense. It must be invited, welcomed, allowed to arrive when conditions are conducive rather than demanded on command. The process of falling asleep offers its own teachings about surrender to temporal flow, about learning to trust rhythms that operate beyond the reach of conscious management. As your body settles and your breathing deepens, as thoughts begin to drift and scatter, according to their own associative logic, you participate in a daily practice of temporal surrender that mirrors the deeper spiritual art of allowing life to unfold according to its own inherent wisdom, rather than forcing it into predetermined patterns. Dreams themselves operate according to purely kairotic time, where significance matters more than sequence, where emotional resonance determines the flow of events rather than logical causation. In dreams, childhood experiences can emerge alongside future possibilities. Symbolic encounters can feel more real than literal memories, and time can compress or expand according to the intensity of feeling rather than the measurement of duration. These nightly excursions into alternative temporality might offer crucial insights into consciousness's deeper relationship with time. Perhaps the linear chronological time of waking consciousness is just one possible organization of awareness among many, useful for practical navigation, but not necessarily fundamental to the nature of mind itself. Dreams reveal consciousness's native capacity to organize experience according to meaning rather than mere sequence, suggesting temporal possibilities that transcend our ordinary assumptions about how time must work. The relationship between waking and dreaming consciousness also illuminates something profound about memory and its role in constructing temporal experience. When you remember an event from your past, you are not simply accessing stored information but actively reconstructing experience in present awareness. Memory is not a passive recording, but a creative process that brings past events into dialogue with present understanding, allowing new meanings and connections to emerge that may not have been visible at the time the original experience occurred. This creative dimension of memory suggests that the past is not fixed and unchangeable, but continues to evolve through its ongoing interaction with present consciousness. Each time you revisit a memory, you bring new perspective and understanding that can reveal previously hidden dimensions of meaning. In this sense, the past remains alive and dynamic, continuing to grow and develop through its relationship with evolving awareness. Similarly, the future exists not as a predetermined destination, but as a field of possibility that takes shape through present choices and intentions. The future influences present experience not through causal determination, but through the power of vision and hope to orient consciousness toward particular possibilities and away from others. What you imagine and expect shapes what you notice and how you respond, creating feedback loops between anticipated futures and present actions that help actualize some possibilities while leaving others unrealized. This dynamic relationship between past, present, and future suggests that temporal experience is fundamentally creative rather than merely mechanical. Each moment represents a unique intersection of inherited conditions and emerging possibilities, a creative synthesis that has never existed before and will never exist again in exactly the same form. Consciousness participates in this temporal creativity, not as passive observer, but as active contributor, helping to weave the patterns that connect past experience with future possibility through the quality of attention and intention brought to present circumstances. The recognition of temporal creativity adds profound significance to ordinary moments of conscious experience. This very moment of contemplation, as your body rests and your mind explores these ancient questions, represents a unique creative event in the universe's ongoing development. The particular configuration of awareness, memory, and possibility that constitutes your present experience is unprecedented and unrepeatable. A singular contribution to the vast tapestry of temporal existence. This uniqueness of each temporal moment evokes both humility and responsibility. Humility because each moment emerges from conditions far beyond personal control, from the vast web of relationships and influences that have shaped the present configuration of circumstances. Responsibility because consciousness contributes to temporal creativity through the quality of awareness brought to present experience through the choices made and the attention given to particular aspects of unfolding reality. Eastern philosophies have long recognized this participatory dimension of temporal experience through concepts like interdependence and co-creation. From this perspective, individual consciousness does not exist separately from temporal flow, but emerges from and contributes to the ongoing creative process by which reality unfolds moment by moment. Personal awareness becomes a unique aperture through which the universe experiences and knows itself, a temporary but irreplaceable perspective within the vast symphony of temporal becoming. This participatory understanding of temporality transforms the existential significance of ordinary experience. Rather than being merely passive observers of a predetermined temporal sequence, conscious beings become active participants in reality's ongoing creation. Each moment of awareness, each choice made and attention given, contributes to the patterns that shape future possibilities while honouring the conditions inherited from the past. As consciousness continues its gentle descent towards sleep, as the boundaries between self and world become increasingly permeable, you might sense this participatory dimension of temporal existence directly. The rhythm of your breathing connects your individual existence to vast planetary and cosmic cycles, while your settling awareness participates in the daily rhythm by which consciousness releases its grip on daytime concerns to allow deeper processes of integration and renewal to unfold. The approach of sleep also reveals something crucial about trust and temporal flow. Falling asleep requires a fundamental act of faith in processes beyond conscious control, a willingness to release the protective vigilance of waking awareness, and allow consciousness to dissolve into states where different kinds of knowing and healing can occur. This daily practice of temporal surrender mirrors the deeper spiritual art of learning to trust life's organic rhythms rather than trying to control outcomes through anxious management of circumstances. In the liminal space between waking and sleeping, where linear thought gives way to associative flow and logical sequence dissolves into dream-like connection, the mystery of temporal existence reveals some of its deepest secrets. Here, in the threshold between different states of consciousness, time becomes fluid and creative, revealing possibilities for experience that transcend ordinary assumptions about how awareness must relate to temporal flow. The gentle transition into sleep becomes a teaching about time's true nature, showing that consciousness is far more flexible and mysterious than daytime assumptions suggest, capable of modes of knowing that transcend linear sequence while maintaining essential continuity of identity and awareness. In releasing control over temporal flow, consciousness discovers deeper rhythms and patterns that operate beyond the reach of willful management, but not beyond the scope of receptive participation. As thoughts continue to drift and scatter like leaves on an autumn pond, as the urgent concerns of chronological time give way to the patient wisdom of kairotic depth, you enter a realm where the questions about time's nature find their resolution not through final answers, but through lived participation in temporal mystery itself. The rhythm of breath and heartbeat continues to mark duration, while somehow existing beyond time's urgency, each cycle complete in itself yet connected to all others in the endless dance of temporal existence. In this deepening stillness, where consciousness settles like silt in clear water, the ancient questions about whether time flows or stands still, whether the future is open or determined, whether consciousness creates temporal experience or simply witnesses it, begin to lose their conceptual edges and reveal themselves as different facets of a mystery too profound for conceptual capture. The nature of time discloses itself not to thinking, but to the quality of awareness that can be present with temporal flow without being overwhelmed by its complexity or urgency. The approaching rest offers its own wisdom about temporal existence, that some mysteries are meant to be lived rather than solved, experienced rather than explained, breathed and dreamed into understanding rather than grasped through intellectual effort alone. In the gentle surrender to sleep's embrace, consciousness demonstrates daily its capacity to release temporal control while maintaining its essential nature, to let go of sequential logic while preserving its fundamental clarity and presence. As the last coherent thoughts dissolve into the wordless knowing of approaching dreams, time itself becomes not a problem to be solved, but a medium to be inhabited, not a river carrying consciousness along, but the very fabric from which awareness and existence are woven together in patterns too intricate and beautiful for any single perspective to comprehend fully. The mystery of temporal existence continues to unfold, inviting ever deeper participation in its eternal dance of becoming, where each moment contains all moments, and each breath carries the rhythm of infinite time. Tonight, as consciousness drifts between the shores of waking thought and the vast ocean of sleep, we find ourselves contemplating perhaps the most intimate mystery of all, the experience of existing as temporal beings who somehow stand both within time and curiously apart from it. Each breath you take marks another moment in your personal journey through duration, yet something in you seems to witness this passage with a kind of eternal stillness that transcends the very flow it observes. The phenomenologists, those careful cartographers of conscious experience, discovered something remarkable about this relationship between awareness and temporality. They found that consciousness doesn't simply exist within time like a boat floating on a river, but rather weaves time into its very fabric through the miraculous processes of retention and pretension, memory and anticipation, creating what they called the living present. This living present is far richer than the mathematical instant of physics, that theoretical point with no duration that marks the boundary between past and future. Instead, the phenomenological present has thickness, texture, and depth. It encompasses not just the immediate now, but trails of the just past that consciousness holds in retention, and tendrils of the about to come that awareness anticipates through pretension. When you listen to a melody, you don't experience it as a series of disconnected notes, but as a flowing pattern that consciousness weaves together across time. The note that sounded a moment ago remains present in retention, while the note about to sound already shapes your expectation through pretension. The melody exists not in any single instant, but in this temporal weaving that consciousness performs moment by moment, creating coherent patterns from the flux of temporal experience. This same temporal synthesis operates in every aspect of conscious experience. When you understand a sentence, you're not simply processing the word that is currently being spoken, but holding the previous words in retention while anticipating the completion of meaning through pretension. Consciousness creates temporal unity from temporal multiplicity, weaving discrete moments into coherent experiences that span duration, while somehow existing in an expanded present that encompasses past and future within its embrace. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger pushed this insight even further, arguing that human existence is essentially temporal, not just accidentally so. We are, in his striking phrase, thrown into time, finding ourselves always already engaged in temporal relationships that we never chose but cannot escape. Our very identity is stretched across time, constituted by the dynamic relationship between our inherited past, our engaged present, and our projected future possibilities. From this perspective, you're not a thing that exists in time but a temporal process, a dynamic pattern of relationships that extends across past, present, and future. Your identity emerges from the ongoing integration of inherited conditions, present circumstances, and future possibilities into coherent patterns of meaning and purpose. To be human is to exist as what Heidegger called being toward death, creatures whose finite temporal existence gives urgency and poignancy to every choice and every moment of awareness. This existential understanding of temporality reveals something profound about the relationship between time and meaning. It's not that meaningful events happen to occur within time, but rather that meaning itself emerges from temporal relationships, from the ways that past experience informs present understanding, while present choices shape future possibilities. The significance of any moment depends on its place within larger temporal patterns that connect it to what came before and what might come after. As you lie there feeling the weight of your own history, the accumulation of experiences and choices that have brought you to this particular moment of contemplation, you're experiencing this temporal dimension of identity directly. Your present awareness contains not just immediate sensations, but layers of memory and association, hopes and fears, dreams and disappointments that give depth and significance to what might otherwise be merely another moment in the mechanical progression of clock time. The French philosopher Henri Bergson offered another perspective on lived temporality through his distinction between time and duration. Time, as measured by clocks and calendars, is spatialized, broken down into discrete units that can be counted and compared. But duration is time as actually experienced by consciousness, flowing and indivisible, more like a melody than a series of separate notes, more like the unfolding of a story than the accumulation of isolated events. Bergson argued that real time is creative, that each moment brings genuinely new possibilities, rather than simply rearranging existing elements according to predetermined patterns. Duration is the medium of genuine novelty, the temporal dimension in which consciousness participates in the ongoing creation of reality, rather than simply witnessing the unfolding of a predetermined script. This creative aspect of temporal experience becomes especially apparent in moments of inspiration, insight, or revelation, when something genuinely new emerges from the intersection of past experience and present circumstance. The creative moment cannot be predicted or manufactured, but emerges from the dynamic interaction between consciousness and temporality, between inherited conditions and emerging possibilities. Artists and writers often describe this creative temporality as a kind of suspension of ordinary time, moments when duration becomes fluid and generative rather than simply progressive. In such states, past influences and future possibilities converge in a pregnant present that gives birth to something unprecedented. The creative process reveals consciousness's participation in temporal becoming rather than its passive observation of temporal passage. As your thoughts continue to drift and flow, following associations and connections that operate according to their own temporal logic rather than linear sequence, you're experiencing something like this creative duration directly. The approach of sleep creates its own liminal temporality, where normal cause and effect relationships become loose and flexible, where past memories and future possibilities interweave in patterns that follow emotional resonance rather than chronological order. The transition between waking and sleeping consciousness offers profound insights into the flexible nature of temporal experience. In dreams, as you know from countless nights of mysterious adventure, time becomes malleable and strange. Childhood experiences intermingle with recent events. Impossible scenarios unfold with perfect emotional logic, and causation operates according to symbolic rather than mechanical principles. Dreamtime reveals consciousness's capacity to organize experience according to principles other than linear sequence. In the realm of dreams, significance matters more than chronology. Emotional truth takes precedence over factual accuracy, and the past can be revised while the future manifests as present experience. Dreams demonstrate that consciousness is not bound by the temporal constraints that govern waking experience, but can explore alternative modes of temporal organization that serve meaning and healing rather than practical navigation. Contemporary research into altered states of consciousness has begun to map these alternative temporalities more systematically, revealing that what we take to be normal temporal experience is just one possible mode among many. In deep meditation, mystical experiences, or psychedelic states, people regularly report encounters with timelessness, with eternal moments that seem to contain infinite duration, or with experiences where linear time dissolves entirely into a kind of eternal present that encompasses all temporal distinctions within its embrace. These exceptional states suggest that consciousness has inherent capacities for temporal experience that transcend the limitations of ordinary sequential awareness. Rather than being permanently bound to linear time, consciousness appears to be capable of multiple temporal modes, each serving different functions and revealing different aspects of what it means to exist as aware beings in a temporal universe. The implications of this temporal flexibility extend beyond personal experience into questions about the nature of reality itself. If consciousness can experience time in fundamentally different ways, what does this tell us about the relationship between subjective experience and objective temporal structure? Are the various temporal modes of consciousness revealing different aspects of time's true nature, or are they creating different temporal realities through the very act of conscious observation? And these questions become particularly intriguing when we consider the role of attention in shaping temporal experience. You've surely noticed how focused concentration can make time seem to slow down, while distraction makes it speed up. How absorbed engagement creates pockets of timeless experience, while boredom stretches minutes into seeming hours. The quality of attention appears to directly influence the texture and rhythm of temporal experience in ways that suggest consciousness is not simply a passive observer of time, but an active participant in its creation. Mindfulness practices from various contemplative traditions work with this relationship between attention and temporality explicitly, training consciousness to inhabit the present moment more fully rather than getting lost in memories of the past or fantasies about the future. But paradoxically, this cultivation of present moment awareness often leads to experiences that transcend temporal categories entirely, revealing dimensions of consciousness that exist beyond the usual distinctions between past, present, and future. The mindful present is not simply a thin slice of time between past and future, but an expanded awareness that encompasses temporal relationships without being bound by temporal sequence. In states of deep mindfulness, the present moment becomes transparent to the eternal, revealing timeless dimensions of consciousness that witness all temporal change without themselves being subject to temporal limitations. As your breathing continues its gentle rhythm, each cycle marking time's passage while somehow existing beyond time's urgency, you might sense this timeless dimension of awareness directly, the consciousness that observes the coming and going of thoughts, the rising and falling of breath. The approach and recession of sleep itself seems to exist in a different temporal register than the phenomena it witnesses, providing a stable background against which temporal change becomes visible and meaningful. This witnessing consciousness is sometimes described in contemplative traditions as the eternal witness, or timeless awareness, not because it exists outside of time, but because it provides the unchanging reference point that allows temporal flow to be recognized and appreciated. Like the banks of a river that remain stable while water flows between them, witnessing awareness remains constant while temporal experiences arise and pass away within its embrace. The relationship between this timeless awareness and temporal experience points to one of the deepest mysteries in the philosophy of consciousness. How can something that doesn't change know change? How can timeless awareness be present with temporal phenomena without losing its essential nature? These questions push philosophical inquiry to its limits, into territories where direct experience becomes more reliable than conceptual analysis. Perhaps this is why contemplative traditions have always emphasized direct inquiry over theoretical speculation when it comes to understanding the deepest questions about consciousness and time. The mystery of temporal awareness reveals itself not to thinking, but to the quality of attention that can be present with experience without being overwhelmed by its complexity or caught up in its drama. The contemplative insight that consciousness has both temporal and timeless dimensions offers a potential resolution to some of the puzzles that have perplexed philosophers for millennia. Rather than consciousness being either purely temporal or purely eternal, it appears to be both simultaneously, participating fully in temporal experience while maintaining access to dimensions of awareness that transcend temporal limitations. This both and, rather than either or understanding of consciousness and temporality, reflects a more nuanced appreciation of the complexity and mystery of aware existence. We are neither purely temporal beings caught helplessly in time's flow, nor purely eternal spirits temporarily trapped in temporal bodies, but rather consciousness itself exploring its own possibilities through the creative interplay between temporal and eternal dimensions of existence. As sleep approaches and the boundaries between different states of consciousness become increasingly fluid, you enter a realm where these deepest insights about time and awareness might reveal themselves directly rather than conceptually. In the threshold between waking and sleeping, where linear thought gives way to associative flow and logical sequence dissolves into creative connection, the mystery of temporal consciousness continues to unfold in ways that transcend ordinary understanding. The gentle descent into sleep becomes its own contemplative practice, a daily opportunity to explore the relationship between consciousness and temporality through direct experience rather than abstract reasoning. As control over sequential thought gradually releases and awareness settles into deeper rhythms of rest and renewal, consciousness demonstrates its capacity to exist in multiple temporal modes simultaneously, maintaining essential continuity while allowing fundamental transformation to occur. In this approaching rest, the questions about time's ultimate nature find their resolution not through final answers, but through the lived recognition that some mysteries are too profound for conceptual capture, and can only be approached through the patient cultivation of aware presence with whatever temporal experience presents itself moment by moment. The rhythm of breath continues its ancient pattern, marking duration while existing beyond time's demands, each cycle complete in itself, yet connected to all others in the vast web of temporal relationships that connect your individual existence to cosmic rhythms and planetary cycles that span scales of time impossible for human consciousness to fully comprehend, yet somehow intimately present in every heartbeat and every breath. As thoughts continue to drift like clouds across the vast sky of awareness, as the urgent concerns of chronological time give way to the patient wisdom of timeless presence, you settle into a space where the mystery of temporal existence reveals itself not as a problem to be solved, but as a reality to be inhabited with ever-deepening appreciation and wonder. The approaching dreams will carry their own temporal wisdom, organizing experience according to principles that transcend linear logic while maintaining their own perfect coherence and meaning. In sleep, consciousness continues its exploration of temporal possibilities, weaving together past and future in creative patterns that serve healing and integration, rather than practical navigation, revealing dimensions of temporal experience that remain hidden during the focused attention of waking consciousness. Tonight, as awareness dissolves into the wordless knowing of approaching rest, time itself becomes not an external container within which consciousness exists, but the very medium through which awareness explores its own infinite possibilities, the creative dimension in which meaning emerges from the dynamic relationship between memory and anticipation, inheritance and choice, the given and the possible. In this gentle surrender to sleep's embrace, consciousness demonstrates once again its essential nature as temporal creativity itself, the ongoing process by which the universe becomes aware of its own unfolding, explores its own possibilities and discovers ever deeper patterns of meaning and beauty within the vast mystery of existence that continues to reveal itself moment by moment, breath by breath, dream by dream, in the eternal dance of temporal becoming that encompasses all experience while transcending every attempt to capture its essence in words or concepts. The questions about time's nature dissolve into lived participation in temporal mystery itself, where each moment contains all moments and every breath carries the rhythm of infinite duration, where consciousness and time reveal themselves as different aspects of the same fundamental creativity that gives birth to meaning, beauty and awareness itself within the vast, patient unfolding of existence that welcomes all experience while belonging ultimately to none, eternal and temporal simultaneously, forever exploring the inexhaustible mystery of what it means to be aware within the flowing stillness of time's embrace. The flowing stillness of time's embrace. As consciousness settles deeper into rest, we encounter perhaps the most intimate temporal mystery of all, the relationship between time and identity, between the flow of moments and the persistent sense of being a continuous self across the cascading river of experience. Who is it that remembers yesterday's conversations, anticipates tomorrow's possibilities, and somehow remains present through decades of physical and mental change? The philosopher John Locke proposed that personal identity consists in the continuity of memory, that you're the same person who experienced childhood summers because you can remember those experiences as your own. But this raises puzzling questions about the nature of selfhood across time. If memory makes identity, what happens to the parts of your past that you've forgotten? Are those experiences still yours, or do they belong to someone who no longer exists? The ship of Theseus paradox illuminates these temporal puzzles about identity in a particularly vivid way. If a ship has all its parts gradually replaced, one plank at a time, until none of the original materials remain, is it still the same ship? Applied to human identity, this becomes even more mysterious. Your body replaces most of its cells every 7 years. Your thoughts and beliefs evolve continuously. Yet something persists that you recognize as fundamentally yourself. Perhaps the answer lies not in any particular content of experience, but in the temporal structure of consciousness itself. The philosopher William James suggested that the self is not a thing but a process, a continuous stream of consciousness that maintains its identity through its very continuity, rather than through any fixed substance or unchanging core. This process view of identity suggests that you're not so much a being who exists in time, but a temporal pattern, a dynamic organization of experience that maintains its coherence across change, while remaining fundamentally open to transformation. Like a melody that remains recognizable even when played in different keys or at different speeds, personal identity might persist through temporal change while being constituted by that very change. The Buddhist understanding of identity offers another perspective on these temporal puzzles, suggesting that the persistent self we imagine is itself an illusion created by the stream of consciousness. From this view, there is no fixed entity that moves through time, but only an ever-changing flow of experiences that creates the mirage of continuity through its rapid succession. Yet even from this perspective, something maintains coherence across temporal change, something that allows for learning, growth, and the accumulation of wisdom across lifetimes of experience. Perhaps what we call the self is better understood as a verb than a noun, an ongoing process of becoming rather than a static entity that endures through time. As your own sense of selfhood becomes increasingly fluid in the approach of sleep, as the boundaries of personal identity soften and blend with the larger rhythms of rest and renewal, you might glimpse something of this process nature of identity directly. The self that lies here contemplating time's mysteries is both continuous with and different from the self that woke this morning, connected through memory and intention, yet transformed by every moment of intervening experience. This fluid understanding of identity across time opens possibilities for relating to personal history and future potential with greater freedom and creativity. If the self is a process rather than a fixed entity, then past mistakes need not define present possibilities, and future potential remains genuinely open rather than predetermined by previous patterns of thought and behaviour. The temporal nature of identity also reveals something profound about the relationship between individual consciousness and the larger patterns of cosmic becoming. Your personal journey through time participates in vast cycles of growth and decay, creation and dissolution that connect your individual existence to the rhythms of planets and stars, seasons and centuries, the birth and death of species and civilizations. From this cosmic perspective, personal identity becomes less like a separate thread and more like a unique pattern within an infinite tapestry, distinguishable from but inseparable from the larger weaving of which it forms a part. Your individual consciousness becomes a temporary aperture through which the universe experiences and knows itself, a fleeting but irreplaceable perspective within the vast symphony of temporal becoming. This recognition can evoke both humility and profound significance. Humility because individual existence is clearly part of something far larger and more enduring than personal concerns and ambitions. Significance because consciousness represents the universe's capacity for self-awareness, meaning that your individual perspective, however temporary, contributes something irreplaceable to the cosmos's ongoing self-discovery. The ancient Stoics understood something essential about this relationship between individual temporality and cosmic time, teaching that wisdom consists partly in learning to distinguish between what is within our control and what lies beyond it. The vast majority of temporal circumstances, the historical period into which you were born, the family and culture that shaped your early development, the larger social and political currents that influence your life's possibilities, all of these lie beyond personal control. Yet within these given circumstances, consciousness retains the capacity to choose how to respond, what meaning to create from inherited conditions, how to relate to the temporal flow of experience with greater or lesser wisdom and compassion. This freedom operates within temporal constraints but is not eliminated by them, creating space for genuine choice and moral responsibility even within the deterministic flow of cause and effect. The Stoic understanding points toward a mature relationship with temporality that neither fights against time's limitations nor surrenders all agency to temporal forces beyond control. Instead, it suggests learning to work skillfully with temporal conditions, accepting what cannot be changed, while taking responsibility for what lies within the sphere of conscious choice and intention. This wisdom becomes particularly relevant as consciousness approaches sleep, when the normal mechanisms of control and management must be gradually released to allow deeper processes of rest and renewal to unfold naturally. The art of falling asleep mirrors the deeper spiritual art of learning when to act and when to allow, when to direct and when to receive, when to engage and when to surrender to rhythms larger than personal will. The mystery of dreams offers its own insights into the temporal nature of consciousness and identity. In dreams, the normal constraints of linear time often dissolve entirely, allowing past experiences to intermingle with future possibilities in ways that serve healing and integration, rather than chronological accuracy. Dreams reveal consciousness's capacity to reorganize temporal experience according to emotional and symbolic logic rather than mechanical sequence. The dream self often feels continuous with waking identity, while being capable of actions and experiences that transcend ordinary limitations. In dreams, you might find yourself simultaneously child and adult, in familiar locations that are also strange and transformed, engaged in activities that are both meaningful and impossible, according to waking logic. These dream experiences suggest that identity itself might be more flexible and creative than waking consciousness typically recognizes. The coherent sense of being a continuous self across time might be one particular organization of consciousness among many possible modes, useful for navigating physical reality, but not necessarily fundamental to awareness itself. Some traditions speak of multiple selves or soul aspects that become accessible in altered states of consciousness, suggesting that what we take to be unified identity might actually be a coalition of different aspects of awareness that take turns being prominent depending on circumstances and states of consciousness. From this perspective, the approach of sleep becomes an opportunity to explore dimensions of selfhood that remain hidden during focused waking attention. The liminal space between waking and sleeping often reveals aspects of consciousness that don't fit easily into ordinary categories of identity and temporality. In this threshold realm, memories from different periods of life might feel equally present. Future possibilities might manifest with the immediacy of current experience, and the boundaries between self and world might become permeable and fluid. These liminal experiences point toward possibilities for consciousness that transcend the limitations of ordinary temporal identity while remaining grounded in embodied existence. Rather than suggesting that temporal identity is merely illusion, they reveal it as one mode of consciousness among many, each serving different functions and revealing different aspects of what it means to be aware beings in a temporal universe. The contemplation of identity across time also illuminates the relationship between individual consciousness and collective memory, between personal history and the larger cultural and species patterns that shape individual possibilities. Your thoughts, dreams, and aspirations emerge from linguistic and conceptual frameworks developed over centuries of human cultural evolution, connecting your individual consciousness to vast networks of shared meaning and collective wisdom. In this sense, personal identity extends far beyond the boundaries of individual memory and experience to encompass the entire heritage of human consciousness, the accumulated insights and discoveries that make current levels of awareness and understanding possible. You think with concepts developed by countless previous thinkers, feel with the emotional patterns shaped by millennia of human relationship, and dream with symbols that connect to the deepest layers of collective unconscious wisdom. This recognition of the collective dimensions of consciousness reveals individual identity as both unique and universal, particular to your specific configuration of experience, yet participating in patterns of awareness that transcend individual limitations. Personal consciousness becomes a unique expression of universal consciousness, a temporary but irreplaceable note in the infinite symphony of awareness, exploring its own possibilities through countless individual perspectives. As sleep continues its gentle approach, as individual consciousness prepares to dissolve into the deeper rhythms of rest and renewal that connect personal existence to cosmic cycles of activity and repose, The questions about temporal identity find their resolution not through conceptual analysis, but through lived participation in the mystery of conscious existence itself. The rhythm of breathing continues its ancient pattern, connecting individual life to planetary rhythms while maintaining the unique signature that distinguishes your particular embodiment from all others. Each breath is both yours alone and part of the vast atmospheric circulation that connects all breathing beings across the surface of the earth, individual and universal simultaneously. In this deepening rest, personal identity reveals itself as both real and fluid, both continuous and constantly transforming, both separate and inseparably connected to the larger patterns of existence within which individual consciousness emerges, flourishes, and eventually dissolves back into the source from which it arose. The self that contemplates time's mysteries is itself a temporal phenomenon, arising from and returning to the vast ocean of awareness that knows no permanent boundaries, yet expresses itself through infinite temporary forms. The approaching dreams will carry their own wisdom about identity and time, allowing consciousness to explore aspects of selfhood that remain hidden during waking focus, while maintaining the essential thread of continuity that allows for learning, growth, and the accumulation of understanding across different states and stages of conscious existence. Tonight, as awareness settles into the wordless knowing of approaching rest, identity itself becomes not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived, not a fixed entity to be defended, but a creative process to be explored with curiosity and wonder. The questions about who you really are across time find their answers not in concepts, but in the lived reality of conscious existence itself, always present yet never fully graspable, eternal and temporal simultaneously, forever exploring the inexhaustible mystery of what it means to be aware within the flowing dance of temporal becoming. In this gentle surrender to sleep's embrace, consciousness demonstrates once again its essential nature as the creative intersection of time and timelessness, individuality and universality, the temporary and the eternal, where all apparent contradictions dissolve into the lived unity of aware existence that welcomes all experience while ultimately transcending every attempt to capture its essence in words or categories. The mystery of temporal identity continues to unfold, revealing itself as the very heart of conscious existence, the creative process by which awareness explores its own infinite possibilities through countless individual perspectives, each unique yet connected, each temporary yet participating in patterns that endure across ages, each a singular expression of the universal consciousness that gives birth to time, identity, and the endless wonder of existence itself. As thoughts drift like autumn leaves on still water, as the last coherent reflections dissolve into the associative flow of approaching dreams, time and identity reveal themselves as different faces of the same fundamental mystery that encompasses all experience while belonging to none, forever present in every moment yet never captured by any particular configuration of consciousness. Eternal creativity expressing itself through temporal forms in the endless dance of becoming. That is existence itself. That is existence itself. In the gentle darkness that embraces your settling consciousness, we arrive at perhaps the most profound temporal mystery of all, the question of whether time itself might be nothing more than a persistent and beautiful illusion, a story consciousness tells itself to make sense of existence that transcends all temporal categories entirely. This possibility has haunted human thought since the earliest philosophers gazed up at unchanging stars and wondered whether the apparent flow of moments might be no more real than shadows dancing on a cave wall. If the deepest reality is eternal and timeless, then perhaps what we experience as temporal flow is simply the way finite consciousness encounters an infinite and unchanging truth that lies beyond all temporal distinctions. The great mystics of various traditions have consistently reported encounters with what they describe as eternal presence, a dimension of reality where past, present, and future collapse into a single, all-encompassing now that contains everything while being contained by nothing. In these mystical states, the ordinary experience of temporal sequence dissolves entirely, replaced by an awareness so complete and immediate that it seems to transcend time itself. These reports cannot be easily dismissed as mere hallucination or wishful thinking, for they emerge from centuries of careful contemplative investigation conducted by some of humanity's most rigorous and disciplined minds. The convergence of mystical testimony across cultures and centuries suggests that consciousness might indeed have access to dimensions of reality that operate according to principles fundamentally different from temporal sequence. But what would it mean for time to be illusory? This doesn't necessarily imply that temporal experience is meaningless, or that the passage of moments is purely imaginary. Rather, it might suggest that temporality represents one particular way that consciousness organizes its encounter with a reality that is itself beyond temporal categories. Like the way a prism breaks white light into a spectrum of colors that don't exist separately in the original source. From this perspective, the flow of time might be something like the way consciousness reads eternity, breaking down an infinite and immediate presence into digestible sequences that finite awareness can navigate and understand. Just as we might read a book one word at a time even though the entire story exists simultaneously on the page, consciousness might experience eternal reality one moment at a time even though the complete truth transcends all temporal boundaries. This possibility transforms our understanding of memory and anticipation, past and future. If all moments exist eternally in timeless reality, then memory becomes not the retrieval of something that once was but the accessing of what always is, while anticipation becomes not the imagining of what might be, but the sensing of what eternally exists beyond the current focus of temporal awareness. Your childhood experiences from this view don't exist in some distant past, but remain eternally present in the timeless dimension of reality, accessible through memory because they never actually cease to be. Similarly, future possibilities don't await creation in some distant tomorrow, but exist now in the eternal present, becoming accessible to consciousness as it learns to expand beyond the limitations of sequential awareness. This eternal perspective offers a radically different understanding of death and birth, beginning and ending. If consciousness participates in timeless reality, then what we call death might be simply a transition between different modes of temporal experience, rather than an absolute termination of existence. The consciousness that contemplates these mysteries might be itself eternal, temporarily focused through the lens of individual identity, but never ultimately bounded by temporal limitations. As your breathing continues its gentle rhythm, connecting your individual existence to vast planetary cycles, while somehow existing beyond the urgency of measured time, you might sense something of this eternal dimension directly. The awareness that witnesses breath, thoughts, and sensations seems to exist in a different temporal register than the phenomena it observes, providing a hint of consciousness that participates in but transcends temporal flow. Yet even if time is ultimately illusory, the illusion serves profound purposes in the development and education of consciousness. Through temporal experience, awareness learns to make distinctions, to appreciate causation, to understand the relationship between choice and consequence. The apparent flow of moments provides a framework within which consciousness can explore its own possibilities in manageable segments rather than being overwhelmed by infinite simultaneity. The illusion of time, if illusion it is, becomes a kind of divine pedagogy, a teaching method that allows consciousness to discover its own nature, gradually rather than all at once. Through the patient exploration of temporal relationships, awareness develops the capacity to appreciate unity without losing the richness that comes from multiplicity and sequence. This educational understanding of temporality suggests that the experience of time serves consciousness in much the same way that dreams serve the psyche, providing a space for exploration, integration, and learning that operates according to its own logic, while ultimately serving the development of deeper understanding. From this perspective, waking life becomes itself a kind of dream, a temporal fantasy that consciousness creates to explore its own infinite possibilities in finite forms. The recognition that time might be illusory need not diminish the significance of temporal experience, but rather reveals it as a magnificent creative achievement of consciousness itself. If awareness can create the convincing appearance of temporal flow, complete with causation, sequence, and the poignant beauty of impermanence, then consciousness reveals itself as far more creative and powerful than we typically imagine. This creative understanding of temporality connects to ancient teachings about the nature of reality as cosmic play or divine theatre, where consciousness entertains itself by creating apparently separate selves who forget their eternal nature long enough to rediscover it through the journey of temporal experience. The drama of time becomes a kind of cosmic game of hide and seek, where eternal awareness temporarily conceals itself in temporal forms only to eventually recognize its own face reflected in every moment and every experience. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of understanding time as illusion is the way it transforms our relationship to temporal anxiety and urgency. If the deepest reality is eternal presence, then nothing essential can ever truly be lost. No opportunity is ever permanently missed, and no mistake can fundamentally damage what is eternally perfect and complete. This doesn't lead to passivity or indifference, but rather to a kind of relaxed engagement with temporal experience that can appreciate the drama without being overwhelmed by it. Like an actor who becomes fully absorbed in their role while never completely forgetting they are performing, consciousness can participate completely in temporal experience while maintaining access to the eternal perspective that sees through time's apparent limitations. As sleep approaches and the boundaries between different states of consciousness become increasingly fluid, you enter a realm where these insights about time's illusory nature might reveal themselves directly rather than conceptually. In the liminal space between waking and sleeping, the normal constraints of temporal sequence often dissolve, offering glimpses of consciousness organized according to principles that transcend linear causation. The transition into dreams provides nightly evidence of consciousness's capacity to create convincing temporal experiences that operate according to their own internal logic, while being ultimately grounded in timeless awareness. Dreams demonstrate that consciousness can generate apparently objective temporal sequences, complete with causation, narrative development, and emotional consequence, even though the entire experience unfolds within awareness that exists outside normal temporal constraints. Perhaps waking life operates according to similar principles on a larger scale, with consciousness creating the appearance of objective temporal flow while remaining grounded in eternal presence that transcends all temporal categories. The difference between dreaming and waking might be less about the reality of temporal experience and more about the persistence and consensus of particular temporal constructions. This possibility invites a fundamental reorientation toward temporal existence, from fighting against time's limitations to appreciating time as consciousness's creative expression, from anxiety about temporal passage to wonder at awareness's capacity to create such convincing and beautiful temporal experiences. If time is consciousness's greatest artwork, then every moment becomes an opportunity to appreciate the creative genius of awareness itself. The ancient Vedantic teaching Tattvamasi, meaning thou art that, points toward this recognition that individual consciousness and ultimate reality are not separate, that the awareness reading these words is itself the eternal presence that creates and transcends all temporal experience. From this perspective, the question is not whether time is real or illusory, but how consciousness can most skillfully participate in its own temporal creation, while maintaining access to the eternal wisdom that sees through all apparent limitations. As your thoughts continue to drift and scatter like clouds across the vast sky of awareness, as the urgent concerns of chronological time give way to the patient wisdom of eternal presence, you settle into a space where the mystery of temporal existence reveals itself as the play of consciousness itself. the way awareness entertains and educates itself through the magnificent illusion of sequential experience. The approaching rest offers its own teaching about the relationship between temporal experience and timeless awareness, showing how consciousness can release its grip on sequential control while maintaining its essential nature, how awareness can let go of temporal management while preserving its fundamental clarity and presence. Sleep demonstrates that consciousness is far more flexible than daytime assumptions suggest, capable of creating and dissolving temporal experiences while remaining grounded in something that transcends all temporal categories. In this gentle surrender to sleep's embrace, the questions about time's ultimate nature find their resolution not through final answers, but through lived participation in the mystery itself. Whether time flows or stands still, whether moments pass or remain eternal, whether consciousness creates temporal experience or discovers it becomes less important than the quality of awareness brought to whatever temporal configuration presents itself. The rhythm of breath and heartbeat continues to mark duration, while somehow existing beyond time's demands, each cycle complete in itself yet connected to all others in patterns that suggest both temporal flow and eternal recurrence, sequential development and timeless perfection, existing simultaneously in the paradox that is conscious existence within apparent time. Tonight, as awareness dissolves into the wordless knowing of approaching dreams, time itself reveals its deepest secret, that it exists neither as objective flow nor pure illusion, but as the creative medium through which consciousness explores its own infinite nature, the temporal stage upon which eternal awareness performs the cosmic drama of forgetting and remembering its own timeless essence. The mystery deepens rather than resolves, inviting ever deeper participation in the wonder of temporal existence, whether understood as ultimate reality or divine illusion, as objective flow or subjective construction, as the fundamental structure of existence or the magnificent play of consciousness, discovering its own creative capacity through the beautiful and poignant experience of apparent temporal becoming. In the approaching stillness, where thoughts dissolve like morning mist and sequential logic gives way to the associative wisdom of sleep, consciousness prepares to demonstrate once again its mastery over temporal construction, creating entire worlds of experience that feel completely real and objective, while remaining grounded in the timeless awareness that witnesses all temporal dramas without being bound by their apparent limitations. The dance between time and timelessness continues, neither fully temporal nor purely eternal, but something more mysterious and beautiful than either category can capture, the lived reality of conscious existence that embraces all temporal experience while ultimately transcending every attempt to reduce its mystery to conceptual understanding, forever present in every moment yet never fully contained by any particular configuration of awareness, the eternal creativity that gives birth to time itself while remaining forever beyond time's reach, expressing itself through temporal forms, while maintaining its essential nature as the timeless source from which all experience arises and to which all experience returns in the endless cycle of consciousness, exploring its own infinite possibilities through the magnificent and mysterious medium of apparent temporal flow. In this gentle space where consciousness hovers between the shores of waking thought and the vast ocean of sleep, we encounter one final temporal mystery that brings us full circle to where our journey began, the recognition that all our questions about time's nature emerge from within time itself, creating a kind of beautiful philosophical recursion that mirrors the very mystery we seek to understand. Consider the curious fact that every theory about time, every insight into temporal flow, every mystical glimpse of eternity must be expressed through temporal language, understood through temporal consciousness, and communicated across the temporal medium of sequential words and developing ideas. We cannot step outside time to examine it objectively, but must explore its nature from within its embrace, like fish trying to understand water while remaining immersed in the ocean of their existence. This temporal recursion creates what philosophers call the hermeneutic circle, where understanding emerges not through linear progression, from ignorance to knowledge, but through a spiral deepening that returns again and again to fundamental questions with ever greater appreciation for their mystery. Each time we approach the puzzle of temporal existence, we bring new experience and perspective that reveals previously hidden dimensions while opening fresh territories for exploration. The ancient symbol of the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, captures something essential about this recursive nature of temporal inquiry. Time contemplating itself, consciousness exploring its own temporal nature, awareness using temporal concepts to transcend temporal limitations, all of these create loops and spirals that suggest reality's fundamental structure might be more circular than linear, more recursive than progressive. This circular quality appears throughout temporal experience at every scale. Your breathing creates cycles within cycles, daily rhythms nested within seasonal patterns, personal development spiraling through recurring themes and challenges, civilizations rising and falling in patterns that echo across centuries. Even your approaching sleep participates in this recursive temporality, marking the end of one day's exploration of consciousness while preparing for tomorrow's fresh encounter with the mystery of aware existence. The contemplation of these temporal spirals can evoke a kind of peaceful vertigo, a gentle dizziness that comes from recognizing the groundless ground of conscious existence. If time is the medium within which all understanding develops, then perhaps the deepest wisdom about temporality lies not in solving its puzzles, but in learning to dance more gracefully with its paradoxes and contradictions. Eastern philosophies have long recognized this dance-like quality of wisdom, speaking of understanding that moves like water rather than standing like stone, knowledge that flows like wind rather than fixing like ice. From this perspective, the exploration of time's mystery becomes less about reaching final conclusions, and more about developing the capacity to remain present with questions that have no final answers, to find peace within puzzles that transcend conceptual resolution. As your consciousness continues its gentle descent towards sleep, as thoughts become increasingly fluid and associative, rather than linear and logical, you demonstrate this dance-like wisdom directly. The transition toward dreams requires a kind of philosophical surrender, a willingness to release the need for conceptual clarity and allow understanding to emerge through participation rather than analysis. This shift from analytical to participatory knowing reflects something profound about consciousness's relationship to its own deepest mysteries. Some truths can only be lived rather than thought, only experienced rather than explained, only danced rather than dissected. The nature of time appears to be one of these lived truths, revealing itself most clearly not to abstract reasoning, but to the quality of awareness that can be present with temporal experience without needing to control or completely comprehend it. The approaching dreams will demonstrate this participatory knowing directly, organizing experience according to principles that transcend ordinary logic, while maintaining their own perfect internal coherence. In dreams, consciousness reveals its native capacity to create meaningful temporal sequences that serve wisdom and healing, rather than mechanical causation, showing that awareness is not bound by the temporal constraints that govern physical reality, but can explore alternative modes of temporal organization that serve deeper purposes. Perhaps this dream wisdom offers the most profound insight into time's ultimate nature, that temporality itself might be consciousness's way of exploring meaning rather than merely marking duration, of creating significance rather than simply measuring intervals, of developing understanding rather than just tracking sequence. From this perspective, every moment becomes not just a point on a temporal line, but a unique opportunity for awareness to deepen its appreciation of existence itself. The mystery of time thus reveals itself as inseparable from the mystery of consciousness, the puzzle of temporal flow intertwined with the enigma of awareness itself. To explore one is necessarily to encounter the other, for time and consciousness appear to be different aspects of the same fundamental creativity that gives birth to experience while transcending every particular manifestation of experiential content. In these final moments before sleep's embrace, as linear thought dissolves into the wordless knowing that precedes dreams, the exploration of temporal mystery finds its natural completion not in answers, but in a deeper appreciation for the questions themselves. The wonder that began this journey continues to unfold, revealing itself as the very heart of conscious existence, the eternal curiosity that drives awareness to explore its own infinite possibilities through the magnificent medium of temporal experience. The rhythm of your breathing marks the transition from contemplation to rest, each cycle carrying the ancient wisdom that some mysteries are meant to be lived rather than solved, breathed rather than analysed, dreamed rather than dissected. In releasing the need to understand time completely, consciousness discovers a more intimate relationship with temporality itself, one based on participation rather than explanation, on presence rather than comprehension. Tonight, as awareness settles into the creative temporality of approaching dreams, the questions about time's nature transform from problems requiring solution into invitations for ever deeper participation in the mystery of conscious existence itself. Whether time flows or stands still, whether moments pass or remain eternal, whether consciousness creates temporal experience or discovers it becomes less significant than the quality of presence brought to whatever temporal configuration unfolds. The approaching rest carries its own temporal wisdom, demonstrating consciousness's capacity to inhabit multiple temporal modes simultaneously, while maintaining its essential nature as the creative source from which all temporal experience emerges and to which all temporal exploration ultimately returns. In sleep's embrace, the dance between time and timelessness continues, revealing new steps and rhythms in the eternal choreography of awareness exploring its own infinite possibilities through the beautiful and mysterious medium of temporal becoming. The mystery remains, as it must, forever deeper than any particular understanding, yet intimately present in every moment of conscious existence, forever inviting further exploration while remaining complete in itself, eternal and temporal simultaneously in the paradox that is awareness itself, dancing between time and timelessness in the endless creativity of consciousness, discovering its own nature through the magnificent illusion and profound reality of temporal flow that carries all experience while belonging ultimately to the timeless source from which every moment springs and to which every question returns, in the gentle silence of approaching sleep where all mysteries find their resolution in lived participation rather than conceptual solution. And so, dear sleepy philosophers, we find ourselves at the end of this gentle journey through the corridors of temporal mystery, having wandered together through ancient Greek puzzles and quantum paradoxes, through Einstein's revelations and Augustine's confessions, through the lived experience of moments that stretch like eternity, and eternities that pass like heartbeats. We've explored time as flowing river and timeless presence, as cosmic illusion and intimate reality, as the stage upon which consciousness performs its endless dance of becoming. Yet perhaps the most beautiful discovery is that time remains as mysterious now as when we began. Not because our exploration has failed, but because mystery itself is time's deepest gift to consciousness. As your breathing settles into the ancient rhythm that connects you to all sleeping beings across this temporal world, remember that every question we've touched tonight continues to unfold in the quiet laboratory of your own lived experience, in dreams, in memory, in the gentle passage from one breath to the next. The mystery of temporality reveals itself not through answers, but through the profound intimacy of simply being present with the flow. Whether time is real or illusion, whether moments truly pass or eternally remain, you are the consciousness through which these mysteries explore themselves, the the awareness in which all temporal puzzles find their deepest resolution not in concepts, but in the lived wonder of existing within time's embrace. Sleep well, knowing that tomorrow's awakening will bring fresh opportunities to dance with these eternal questions. Each morning, a new beginning in consciousness's endless exploration of its own temporal nature. The mystery of time flows on, carrying you gently toward dreams where past and future dissolve into the eternal creativity of awareness itself. Good night, fellow travellers in the vast mystery of temporal existence.